including partners in the Asia-Pacific region and Latin America. European defense will need to be linked to the world. GlobSec European Security Initiative is our flagship initiative that aims to critically analyze the current state of development of European defense capabilities and put forward a strategic vision of European defense in light of this context. What is a feasible and desirable level of ambition of European defense integration? What measures can be taken to deliver tangible results? We offer answers to these questions and much more within the initiative and are looking forward to working with you on refining them further.
So, welcome everyone to our panel discussion on Greater European Strategic Autonomy, as the panel is called, since we only have 45 minutes for a highly important and interesting topic and really a high-class panel. Let's zoom right into it. I'll do a quick round of introduction. My name is Kai Küstner. I'm currently ARD German radio correspondent in Berlin. I used to report on the war in Afghanistan from South Asia and also spent 5 years for ARD in Brussels, where I firsthand experienced the EU effort to come to terms with the Russian annexation of Crimea, the Brexit referendum, and of course, last but not least, the Trump election, all of which were probably the main triggers for a push for greater European strategic autonomy, which is our topic today. But who you really want to hear are our panelists. I'm happy to present you 2 civilians and 2 generals, very well chosen. I'll do ladies first. Let me start with Nathalie Loiseau, who has a long career in the French diplomatic service, who recently served as French Minister of European Affairs. She's currently chairing the subcommittee on security and defense of the European Parliament. Welcome.
Hello.
Second up, we have General Claudio Graziano. Mr. Graziano joined the Italian army back in 1972, became its chief of staff in 2011, and is now chairman of the European Union Military Committee, which means you're presiding over the chiefs of defense of the EU member states and you're advising the High Representative. To stay with the generals, we have General Knut Bartels, who served as the Danish Chief of Defense and was chairman of the NATO Military Committee from 2011 to 2015. And you're from an EU country, Mr. Bartels, which has an opt-out on EU defense, who does not participate in PESCO, so that should be an interesting topic, I think. And last but not least, let me introduce Carl Bildt, co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations, among many other things, as your Twitter account tells us. Carl Bildt used to be the Prime Minister of Sweden from 1991 to 94 and Foreign Minister for many years until 2014. So thank you all for joining us. From my side, let me start with the question I would like to ask to all of you. So we have a little bit of a solid base for our discussion. There seems to be a lot of confusion what strategic autonomy for Europe actually means. Is it about common defense projects? Is it about a standing EU army? Is it about protecting Eastern Europe against possible threats from Russia one day, which has been a NATO domain so far? Why don't you define the term for us, and maybe let me start with Mr. Bildt.
Well, strategic autonomy is one of these sort of buzzwords in Brussels that I think is to some extent best left not defined. We have strategic autonomy. There are things that we can do on our own. There's no question about that. There are quite a number of things that we don't have the ability to do. notably sort of territorial defense in the East, nuclear issues, large-scale, high-end kinetic war. That is beyond our capabilities. But there are quite a number of other contingencies where we do have the capability in different respects, but in my opinion, we are somewhat reluctant to use the possibilities that we have. And then there is, of course, the intention to gradually broaden the area of questions and contingencies where we have the ability to operate European without American support, that is.
Thank you, Mr. Bild. Mr. Graziano, would you like to go second and give us your definition?
Thank you, and I salute all the other panelists. And I am just back by Berlin anyway, when I was attending the defense ministerial yesterday and this morning, and we discussed also this issue. Now, strategic autonomy is, I would say, is something very important, very strategic for the European defense construction. It's a critical element, is a fundamental element. Sometimes has generated some misconfusion or misperception, but it's something really, really important. It makes the ability to act, the operational part, and of course also the development of an European defense, so an industrial part. But I would like to say at the beginning that strategic autonomy means the ability not to act alone or without something, but to do something with partners when it's possible, or alone when it is necessary or required or appropriate. If you want, if the others, NATO, the other organization, are not interested or not appropriate to operate in this context. And in this moment is absolutely mandatory to reach this kind of level of strategic autonomy if Europe doesn't want to fail in the construction of this global strategy and in becoming a global security provider and be more proactive in this world with all the challenges that we had even before the COVID-19. It was already putting at stake the security of Europe. Also because one thing that the European Union has realized, I have also been a NATO officer up to yesterday before becoming the chairman of the European Union, so I know very well also the NATO environment. But one thing that Europe has understood, that there is probably no military solution to the crisis, but there are no solutions without the military. So the military component, even as a deterrence, is a key element for the solution of all the crises. And the ability to use also the hard power, it's an element of the policy, as an element of CSDP missions and operation. And strategic autonomy in the moment doesn't mean that we are reaching the full autonomy to do everything, but to do what is in the level of ambition of the European Union, and to create and to make stronger the European defense, the industrial base, is also something is reinforcing NATO and the other elements, because that means that we are also more credible with partners. And when we make cooperation, it's a credible cooperation. The important element is the definition of the level of ambition, and so the will of the member states to act.
Breakdown from my side.
And one of my duties that I feel the most important, since I'm the highest ranking, but also the oldest in European Union, is to mobilize the sense of urgency of European country to fulfill the political level of ambition that has been decided with concrete action in the two different paths of the strategic autonomies that are operations, CSDP operation, and on the other side, in the building of the industrial capability and the industrial autonomy that is the capability part. If you want, the part that makes the European Union also a pillar for NATO.
I think you raised a very important topic with the industrial base. Let me first ask Madame Loiseau, how do you define strategic autonomy for Europe?
I think that strategic autonomy is the way for Europe to be a relevant geopolitical actor. We have praised ourselves from being the ultimate soft power for decades, but the world has not become a safer place in recent times. And what we have been through with the pandemic is measuring the level of our dependency, not only a military dependency, but dependency towards others on a number of key issues for the European Union. General Graziano referred to the definition of the strategic autonomy, which is included in the global strategy of 2016. That is to act with our partners and allies every time we can, but to be able to decide and act on our own every time we have to. We might have different strategic priorities with other members of NATO, for instance, which does mean that we want to weaken NATO, but some of us are not members of NATO, and sometimes NATO is not either interested or well equipped to address our strategic priorities. So strategic autonomy is something that we have to develop. And you may remember that the last time the European Parliament voted the CSDP report in the plenary, the notion of strategic autonomy was mentioned not less than 15 times in the report, which doesn't mean it's easy to define it in details. And it is probably part of the work that will be done through the strategic compass that we are going through right now. But there is no doubt that we are facing a number of challenges, threats, which are more diverse than what they used to be, in which we have to be relevant, even being a relevant European partner in NATO.
Okay, and last but not least, Mr. Bartels.
Oh, I'll try to highlighting by raising two questions. Whose strategic autonomy are we talking about? The European Union, but then let's call it the European Union strategic autonomy. And let's not call it the European strategic autonomy for the very simple reason, as was mentioned by Madame Loiseau. There are a number of nations which are not members of the European Union, and vice versa when we talk about NATO. And the key player here is, of course, United Kingdom, as one of the two European nuclear nations, or nuclear powers. So I think the first step is to find out who are we talking about. The second step is with what. There is, of course, a difference between the political level and the military level. And I would like to concentrate on the military level. The military level is very simple. If we do not have a common military strategy, if we do not have a command structure, either borrowing it from NATO or having our own or using expanded national capabilities on that, and if we do not have the troops which are capable of working together and have a minimum of standardization from an industrial and logistic perspective, it would be very difficult. And I would like to warn a bit, as Mr. Carl Bildt alluded to, maybe not with the same purpose as me, I would like to warn a bit against the rhetoric and look at the nuts and bolts of the realities.
Okay, thank you. You also raised the issue, is Great Britain going to be part of a security agenda or not? Let's also, I think we can't leave out the US out of the picture here. In the end, it was doubts about US reliability, which was one of the main reasons for calls for strategic autonomy. And President Trump is actually, I would say, in the process of tearing apart the security architecture the US built after 1945. So my question to you, all of you, would be, is Europe capable of filling the void militarily at all if the US withdraws, and how much should the US withdraw? I know that Germany always says we can only be in well, European sovereignty can only be an add-on to US alignment. We can't leave the US out of the picture. Other European countries are a little more straightforward. So how would you define it on that term, and how should we deal with the US in this respect?
Well, I can start. I mean, there are clearly contingencies that we can't handle without the US. If we take sort of high-end territorial defense in the east of Europe versus a large-scale Russian aggression, which I think is somewhat unlikely, but if you go to Lithuania and Poland, it's uppermost in their mind, can't be done without the US. Can we arm in order to be able to do it together? Well, there have been a couple of studies done in the last few years, and it's doable, but we are talking about decades and very, very substantial increases in defense spending all across. Likely, well, less likely, I would say. And that still leaves out the big nuclear component, with due respect to the French. But there are quite a number of other things that we can do. But I remember from my time when I was attending the council, there was always a reluctance by the governments to use military power. I think the last operation on land that we did as the EU was in Chad in 2007. Since then, every proposal to use sort of more, that's been the largest one we've done. Everything else has been smaller and training. And when confronted with, for example, the situation in Sahel, we rely on sort of ad hoc coalitions, and we rely on the UN and others. But there's been a distinct reluctance in Brussels to actually use military power. We got the battle groups. Paris even have the European Intervention Initiative, which includes the UK, which is a quarter of the military force in Europe. But that hasn't been used either. So I think it's fine that the European Parliament speaks about strategic autonomy, but we still have a situation where the governments in the Council are extremely reluctant, even in contingencies where it should be possible, to use military power.
Would anyone want to answer that? Yeah, Madame Loiseau?
I'm ready.
Yes,
After
I share
Natalie,
a number of things. I share a number of things that Carl Bildt just said. There are obviously issues on which we depend on the United States, and there is no will and no way to replace the United States. But the question mark is whether the United States remains as interested as it was in the past in the security of Europe. And it is not completely related to one specific President of the United States. With President Obama already, the notion of pivoting to Asia was the key of the way the United States was viewing its own strategic priorities. And in a conflict like Syria, we vividly remembered that at the end of the day in 2013, when a red line was crossed, the United States decided not to act, and we were not able to act on our own. And the European Union and Europe as a whole lives with the consequences of the Syrian conflict without having the capacity to act. Carl Bildt is right in mentioning the reluctance of member states. Sometimes they decide on military operations and missions on paper, and they turn them back at the moment where they have to provide staffing and equipment for these operations and missions. And we are more timid, more shy than what we were in the early 2007, as you mentioned. We have become more reluctant at a moment where our neighborhood is less stable. We will probably discuss the situation in the Mediterranean, and I'm not talking only about Eastern Mediterranean, but the situation, if you see Syria, Lebanon, Libya, is a situation where our security is at stake, and there is very little interest from the United States to get into this situation and to provide with military support. So what do? Do we blame the US? Do we complain about the situation? Or do we realize that we have to be able to act autonomously? You also mentioned Sahel. And thank you for mentioning it, because my home country is, of course, very much involved in the security of Sahel, with some difficulties and some success. There are European missions, but there are light footprint missions. There is the UN, but we know that we still depend on the United States, and we still have question marks whether the United States will continue helping us in the Sahel. And I can understand why, seen from Washington, this is not a priority, but seen from Europe, this is obviously a security challenge.
Yes. Now,
Since
if I may,
just mentioned the minute. Yeah, please go ahead. I'll give you the floor directly.
yes, thank you. And also taking notes of what General Barter said, we have to be clear that absolutely there is no competition between the European Union and NATO. Of course, collective defense, it belongs to NATO, and in all the meeting we make is always about increasing cooperation with NATO. But in this moment, we have to be concrete, as it was said, and sometimes this cooperation, this tactical and operational cooperation, is a little bit more difficult than in the past for many reasons. And there are new challenges that are coming from the south. I'm just speaking about Libya to make an example, or in this Mediterranean, in which NATO in this moment is not in condition or in the will to act. And of course, we are not thinking about the European defense without the United States, because as it was said yesterday during the meeting, of course, if we go in operation in Sahel, we hope to be able to be more proactive and to have an increasing level of ambition. It will be much better with the American ISTAR at disposal. It depends if it's available or not available. So if it is not available, there are a level of ambition or a number of mission operations in which we must have this autonomous ability, or go out of the game. And I am referring again to the main, what is one of the main efforts of main theater, that is the Central Mediterranean and Libya, in which there are European operation and NATO operation. In this moment, there is not cooperation between the two because lack of agreement. But this one is an operation that is vital for the European Union to enforce the United Nations resolution and the decision taken in Berlin. Of course, it becomes a matter of will of the nation. You need a military strategy, yes. Since 2016, a lot has been done. And now there is the strategic compass that is going to set the threats and try to have a better coordination between PESCO and the EDF. Is needed a military structure? Yes. In the past, when we had the possibility to use Berlin Plus, it was possible to make use of the NATO command, the NATO command structure to run a European operation. This moment, for different reasons, is not possible. So there is no alternative to build a European ability to run operation. That is also be true leading nation like Atalanta, that is an Italian headquarter, a Spanish headquarter, Irini, it's an Italian headquarter, and for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is still NATO because it's under Berlin Plus. But a planning and conduct capability is needed. Of course, in the best world, we could do much better in cooperation with other organizations, but that's the reality in this moment. That we have to face the reality. We have to face the geostrategic situation in Mediterranean, for example, has changed a lot. There are many crises, area crises along different places in the world and along the sea. And in some ways, the world is much closer to European Union. After that, clearly, is a difficult moment, because in this moment it's difficult to have any agreement also in the Security Council of the United Nations, and in this moment NATO is withdrawing from other places and is more concentrated on the collective defense, and a building of a better European Union, more autonomous capabilities, and the building with the EDF and the other means of better European forces means helping NATO, because there is, as a matter of fact, NATO is the most important military alliance in the world. United Nations, European Union is an international organization that has also the ability to put fund and to finance the development. So we have European Defence Fund, we have European Peace Facility, we have Recovery Fund that are the way to support these initiatives. Of course, the cooperation with United States.
Mr. Graziano, sorry, we'll come to the defense fund as well. But since you all mentioned the Mediterranean, let me ask a provocative question. There is this current escalation between Greece and Turkey for the moment. So you have one EU and NATO country, Greece, doing maneuvers with France, your country, Madame Loiseau, and another NATO country, Turkey, doing a maneuver with the US, while a third EU nation, Germany, is trying to negotiate peace. To be a bit provocative, isn't that working exactly in the wrong direction? Doesn't that show that it's very difficult with strategic autonomy in Europe? Mr. Bartels, yes. I think you wanted to comment.
Yes, even though you have asked a question, I will also come to that question, but I will start by saying Mr. Carl Bildt talked about the probability, high or low, of a potential Russian aggression against Baltic states and Poland and so on. And we could have an interesting discussion about that issue. But what I would like to say is that the world is full of strategic surprises. If we look at what's going on in the Aegean Sea and other places for the time being, I don't think many of us would have foreseen that a number of months ago, even though there might be signs of it. The issue of strategic surprises are seldom the lack of information. They are more whether the minds are open to see what is going to happen or not. And unfortunately, military history and also grand strategy is full of surprises. So I will be careful in discounting what is called full spectrum threats when we talk about Europe. But otherwise, I fully take the point of what has been said, and let me just say, to reinforce Madame Loiseau's view on President Obama. President Trump is not responsible for what's going on. This has been going on for some time, and may I just say that one of the reasons why it's going on is because the Europeans do not want to carry the responsibilities for their own defense. We have limited budgets, and let me say a few words about the budgets. I would say we use a substantial percentage in all the big nations in the European Union to fund national military industries at the expense of maybe at least as good and cheaper common equipment. So we could probably make better use of what we have as funds for the time being if there was a bit more rigorous approach to that issue. As to the question you just raised as to Greece and Turkey. Well, Turkey is where Turkey is, partly because Turkey, now whether Turkey, member of the European Union, would have made any changes, we do not know for evident reasons. Whether Turkey really wanted to become member of the European Union, I do not know. But what I know today is that the Turks feel that they have been we have been looking down at them. This I have experienced through a number of years now. And we shouldn't be surprised they are where they are. I think that the nations which can make a difference, I think the European Union has to play a role, but it has to be extraordinarily careful. And Paris, Berlin, and Athens will have to be very careful, and also Nicosia. And maybe the outsider which can really make a difference, that's Washington. But probably you can forget everything about that on this side of 3 November. So we are facing a very difficult situation, and whether the Chancellor will be able to fill the gap, I don't know. But this might be a very bad repetition of what took place in 1974, which led to the Turkish intervention in Cyprus. Not that I think that anything along those lines would take place, but it might lead to an unnecessary conflict between two NATO allies, and thereby indirectly a very difficult situation between the European Union and NATO. And there will be no winners.
Yes, Madame Loiseau, directly on that issue.
Yes, I agree on the fact that the situation is very tense and dangerous. I would not agree by saying that we were looking down at Turkey and that that's the reason for what's happening. What's happening is due to an authoritarian regime in Ankara, which distanced itself from our strategic priorities, but also our fundamental values. And the European Union, there is no responsibility on that. On the contrary, the problem with Turkey now is that what's happening in Eastern Mediterranean is just one more episode of Turkey acting against the interests, the security interests of Europe. You could mention the military operation of Turkey in eastern Syria, which put obstacles to our own fight against ISIS. You could mention what's taking place in central Mediterranean, where Turkey does not respect the arms embargo decided by the United Nations Security Council regarding Libya. There are a number of issues in which our security interests don't match with the security interests of a member of NATO. And I would not go back to some very famous comments made by President Macron about NATO, but I think that there is a need for strategic discussions within NATO about what are common threats, what are common attitudes, pushing for peace and preventing tensions and military risks. And my position is that if we want to avoid more tensions and more risks, we have to show or resolve and to show that our sovereignty, our borders are something that someone cannot play with. Otherwise, if you remember what President Erdogan said yesterday, he said, if the Europeans want to be serious, they have to be ready to pay a price. Otherwise, they have to let us go. At some point, we have to say, this is enough. If we want a dialogue, if we want diplomacy to prevail, we have to show some strength and some resolve.
For a quick answer, I give Mr. Graziano the floor.
May I
Go ahead for a quick answer.
Yes, very fast. At the beginning of the year, also the High Representative said that with the intervention of Turkey in Libya and the activity of Russia, the geostrategic situation is changing in Mediterranean. So what's happening in the central Mediterranean and what is happening in Libya is connected with happening in East Mediterranean. And there is no doubt that we go back to the need to have hard power, to the need to have hard power, even to run negotiation and as a deterrence. And but we need also, of course, the will to use sometimes even for a deterrence this military power. If we were able to implement correctly Irini, that was established in order to support the Berlin process, and so to apply the embargo decided by United Nations as a step for ceasefire, that would be already a strong message for European Union security and defense. After that, it's a matter of reaching an agreement and to have a European Union to act in a more unified way and to mobilize this sense of urgency. And sometimes within the European country, of course, there is disagreement. As it is difficult now in NATO because, again, there are many European countries that are disagreement. And as I said, we would love to have a better cooperation at sea, for example, between NATO and European Union. In this moment, it's practically impossible to have this. But that means that there are more responsibility for European Union security and defense activity to operate and to become more credible, because the alternative is the failure, but that is not possible because a failure will be a step back over 20 or 30 years. So I am convinced, I'm optimistic, but we have really to be more serious to transform what is the political level ambition that was expressed by all the countries, because also in the crisis between Turkey and Russia and Cyprus, the East Mediterranean, the declaration of Europe is clear, as it is for Belarus, as it is for Libya. But after that, after the definition of the level ambition, we have to run for the activity, the connected activity, and that sometimes is a little bit more difficult. But of course, Rome was not built in few years. From 2016, a lot has been done. We have also to remember that the operation that we had, the greatest operation against terrorism in Iraq was run by a coalition of willing. Probably 10 or 15 years ago would have been run by NATO. But I mean, this one is a timing in which the international organization probably has to readjust to a new world.
What we haven't talked about yet is, let me just bring in the audience at this point, Mr. Bild, and I will give you a chance to answer then as well. What we haven't talked about yet is PESCO, the so-called sleeping beauty of EU defense, and the European Defense Fund, which I think is very important. But right now I would try to bring in other participants. Maybe their questions will focus on that also. So I would like to raise questions from the audience, please, for this moment. Here it comes.
Yes, hello. My name is Tony van der Tocht from the Klingendahl Institute in The Hague. I have indeed a question about the Defense Fund. I have noticed the European ambition in the field of strategic autonomy. The Commission presenting itself as a geopolitical commission. But when you look at the budget negotiations on the multi-annual financial framework, you see that the budget for defense has been decreased enormously when you compare it to the original figures. So how credible is this European defense still if we look at the threats and challenges which we are facing not only in the south but also in the east of Europe?
Yeah, if I want, I can say my opinion. Of course, at the beginning, European defense funds were 13 billion. Now it's 7 billion in 7 years. It's the first time we have 7 billion, so you can see the glass half empty or half full. I would love to go back at least to 13 billion. I want also to remember that the European defense funds are only for research and development up to the acquisition of the fourth prototype. So it's in order to build a stronger European industry and to support this capability. That is extremely important. Now the real priority for us is that the pandemic, the COVID is not going to affect the defense budget that would hamper development. And that can be done only if the European Union learn how to act better together and to make projects that are also European projects that could protect this one. That doesn't mean to make it alone, because many things will be done with United States, with others, and I know United States is also very interested in PESCO and EDF in the other things. Through the strategy, the new strategic compass, we hope to put together all these kind of things to make it more effective. For the first time, we also have EPF, European Peace Facility, to help the operation. The real problem is that this one is crucial here, both for all these new procedures and for the operation. It's also the year in which we are fighting with the COVID-19. So it's really a challenging time. But compared to the past, we did a lot. I also remember that through the Recovery Fund, there are also initiatives that are eligible in the arena of security and defense, like cyber, digitalization, and resilience. So it's again is also the matter of the will of the member states. It's not a lot, but is the largest things ever done by international organization to support the defense and security.
Could I just come in and say that the EDF and PESCO are of course good things, but we will only know sort of 10 years down the road what capability increases they have resulted in that we would not have had otherwise. So it's going to take quite some time. I hope maximum effort is going to go into them. They are going to be sort of supplementary funding to the funding that is going to be in the respective national defense budgets. But then we come back to the question of building the capabilities over the years, and then the political willingness to actually use these capabilities in a credible way in the concrete contingencies. And I think far too much of the discussion is about sort of more theoretical concepts and bureaucratic mechanisms for money in Brussels, and far too little on actually operational contingencies and willingness to use also hard power to support the strategic ambitions that we have.
I would like to support what Mr. Carl Bill has just been saying on this issue, because we are wasting money in Europe on our defenses, as I mentioned earlier, on as to equipment. The only two real future programs which are worth really concentrating on are the future French-German combat aircraft and the future German-French main battle tank. If that can become a European solution to some of the big investments in various armed forces, we will have a real way ahead. Until further notice, we are using a lot of money on nationalizing our own equipment and making it impossible for small nations such as the one I come from to have any influence or any hope to get anything at a decent price. Why do you think the F-35 has been bought by a number of European nations? Because the Europeans, the big nations, have not delivered. It's as simple as that. And we should not forget the nuts and bolts. There's too much rhetoric and not enough facts.
Sorry, just to make a specification. For EDF, you need at least 3 countries with 3 different entities. So 2 countries are not enough. The 2 projects, for sure, the main battle tank and the future air combat system are going to be part of EDF, but I don't know in which one of the, in which forum, in which combination. There is also a big difference between PESCO and EDF. EDF is only research and development. PESCO is capability development, so it's for immediate operation and can be done in a different manner, is financed by the member states, can be financed by European Union if they are also EDF projects. So everything is pushing on the possibility to have EDF supporting. Another important thing, I don't want to run the job actually of the Commissaire Breton, but it's the fact that one of the specific points EDF is that all the countries have to be involved. So there is to be this spreading of things, and a large part is dedicated for medium and small enterprise. The idea is to change the way of run the project. Actually, nobody can make the project and be in the leading nation and having the European fund. The idea is that all the countries have to participate to the project and to find this agreement and this support. It's probably difficult, it requires time. Sometimes it's easier to go outside to make expenses, but again, Europe was able to put 750 million in the recovery fund. Nobody else can do something like that. And also with EDF, is the first that makes this tentative at least. It's an advantage. We have to take possibility of disadvantage. After that, again, the usual is up to the member state. But as a military, my duty is to provide an unfettered and honest advice. And with my rank and my age, I must do it. And to say, don't waste this opportunity, because our nation, maybe with COVID, are a little bit more fragile. With the support of Europe, they can be much stronger, and COVID can be something that help to build the future.
This is the first time I heard the word COVID. Just very quickly, Madame Loiseau, to sum it up, because we are running out of time.
I would simply mention that as General Graziano, I would see the glass half full on EDF. It's a first. Maybe we would like to have more money on EDF, but it's a first, it's a start, and it's a good start. I'm more concerned about national defense budget. We were lagging behind, a number of member states were lagging behind even before the pandemic. And now I'm even more concerned about two narrow defense budgets. And for once, I would agree with Donald Trump that we are not doing enough for our national defense efforts. And I'm somewhat concerned with PESCO, I have to say. I'm concerned that it becomes bureaucracy and processes, as Brussels is so good at, more than something ambitious. At the beginning, we wanted to have something ambitious and inclusive. It became extremely inclusive. I'm not sure it's sufficiently ambitious. And we have to have a clear oversight about what's taking place. And I do regret that the European Parliament doesn't have a say in what's taking place on PESCO.
Okay, thank you. As I predicted, 45 minutes pass very quickly. I think we could go on for at least 24 hours. But I want to say a big thank you for a lot of insight from all you as panelists. Luckily, I don't have to say get home safely, as I would have if we'd met in person. And I would like to tell our audience that a highly interesting topic is coming up in a few minutes. The title is Update on Israel-United Arab Emirates relations after they announced to normalize their relationship. So enjoy that, and thanks once again to all of you, and hopefully talk to you soon or see you in person. Thanks.
Thank you.
All the best.
GlobeSec Tatra Summit drives discussions that shape the future of Europe.